My name is David, and this is The Big Shut-In. As I'm speaking right now, it is Thursday, the 29th of October, 2020. And it's been a while since you've heard from me. As promised in the last published episode of this, I have a couple of really nice conversations in the hopper, and I've just been waiting for me to finish polishing them and put them out to you, which is something I had been doing very quickly and regularly. But for some reason, for the last month, I found it very hard to work on this show. And thinking about why that might be, I think, honestly, it has to do with the election, the United States presidential election. I need hardly specify, which is just a matter of a few days from now. And I just emotionally feel in such a holding pattern, in such a moment of I don't know what to feel right now because of that. Because it feels so momentous and so important that it's been very hard to work on anything that is not an immediate deadline for my paid job. And I just have the overwhelming sensation that whatever the results are, those few days from now, I may feel better, I may feel worse, but at least I'll know what to feel. And at least I'll know how to move forward with a project like this. Because it will either be a hard turn for the better, and I don't think electing Joe Biden is going to immediately fix every problem that we have, but man, it would be a good start. It would be a really good start. At least we'd have someone in there who knows what he's doing and who is at least willing to actually look at the problems that are facing the country right now, these enormous problems, and acknowledge that they exist. To have that be something that would be a change is just stunning. To have a president who's announcing yesterday that his proudest accomplishment is ending the coronavirus, that he feels like he's done that. And all week that there's been 70,000 new cases every day. 70,000 a day. And at least, Biden is an old man, and he's certainly not the dyed-in-the-wool progressive that Fox News is making him out to be. But at least he's willing to look at all of the protesting and unrest around civil rights in this country and say, yes, I recognize that there's a problem there that needs to be addressed. So if he wins, I at least will feel like I can come into these little monologues and this series with a sensation of okay, we're turning a corner. We're going to start actually working on these problems, and then I'll know what to say. I'll know how to think. And if he loses, I'll at least know, okay, back in the bunker, things are going to get worse again. And I know what to think about that. But this Schrodinger's cat situation for the last 6 weeks has just been kind of intolerable emotionally. And honestly, that's why I haven't been putting any new episodes of this show out. And I apologize to you, listener, whoever you may be. But just in the interest of clearing the decks and finally publishing conversations I had more than a month ago, I'm going to get those last couple of banked episodes out. And hopefully next week I can jump back into talking to people with at least a sensation that there's a floor underneath me. Whether it's, a rising elevator or a falling one. So having said that, let's jump in our Wayback Machines. Feel free to insert the sound of harp music here. To Wednesday, September the 9th, day whatever the hell that was, of quarantine, when I spoke to one Mr. Paul Boschi. Paul is an old friend of mine and an old colleague of mine. He was my boss back when I worked in event production and taught me a lot about that world. It's something he is very, very good at, throwing large events, big galas and concerts. And so this has been a tough ride for him, figuring out how to take that multi-decade career of doing something like that and doing it really well, and having that whole industry really shut down, and figure out what to do with that and how to move forward. And so that was something I was really happy to talk to him about and hear about, get that perspective. He's also currently an expatriate. He lives in Germany with his husband, Michael, who is German, in the finance industry there in Germany. And he's been there for several years, and sort of living there and working here in New York, in the United States mostly, commuting back and forth to run these big events. And so getting his perspective on what the previous several months had looked like in Europe from the ground was also really interesting. So it was a great conversation. He's always someone I'm happy to talk to. And so let's hear from Paul. So how you doing?
I'm good, David. Thanks. All things considered, I guess you have to put a caveat after you say I'm good. Yeah. No, we're doing all right. Michael's at work today. He goes into the office pretty much every day now. And it's here in Germany, it's kind of back to normal-ish. So that's helped quite a bit, I think.
What does that look like? What is kind of back to normal? Like,
Well,
I'd love to hear the arc of sort of how it's been there. I have no idea really.
Yeah, a couple months ago, restaurants opened. Well, just before the beginning of the summer, restaurants opened up. They could sit out. You could seat people outdoors, socially distance. You have to wear a mask until you get to your table, or if you get up to use the restroom in the restaurant. There's contact tracing everywhere. So when you get to a restaurant, the first thing you do is everyone fills out their name, email address, phone number, what table you're sitting at, what time you got there. So if there is some sort of an outbreak, they can contact people and say, like, look, you were at the restaurant about the same time somebody tested positive for COVID. They may have been contagious when they were, seated near you or whatever. There's hand sanitizing stations everywhere and all that sort of stuff. Gyms are open, which is really nice because I put on a lot of weight sitting in the house, cooking all day. And that's the same thing. You're not expected to wear a mask while you're working out, but you are expected to wear one in between stations. Shops are open. Every store kind of has their own way to police capacity. So a lot of stores will make you get a basket, and the baskets are all numbered. And if there's no baskets, then you have to wait outside, sort of thing. And at the beginning, when they first opened up, most stores had like a security person, or at least a representative from the store explaining, what the new policies were, blah, blah, blah. And now that's kind of eased up because everyone's got it more or less. So yeah, offices are open back up. Movie theaters are not. Small gatherings are starting to get permitted, both public and private events.
That was my question. Yes, are people socializing? Are people sort of?
Yeah, we actually had friends over. We had about 10 friends come over on Saturday last week, which was like it was just jubilant. Everyone was so happy to be in a group of more than 4 people and to have friends all together again. So that was really nice. Yeah, but it's like nightclubs are not open. Bars are open, but it's mostly outdoor seating or socially distanced, within the bar and that sort of thing. But, you get into problems because it's great. You can see people outdoors, but about 10 o'clock at night, when all the neighbors upstairs are trying to put their kids to sleep and there's a rowdy crowd outside, that causes problems for the bars as well with, curfews and that sort of thing.
The contact tracing thing you mentioned seems like such an obvious idea.
Yeah,
I'm kind of horrified that we're not doing that here. Why not?
Yeah, I mean, there's an app that you can download that basically tracks you. It like runs your battery way down on your phone. But basically, if you do test positive for COVID, you're given a QR code and you scan that. So it's anonymous, and it basically, the algorithm or whatever in the app will track like, when you got contagious and contact anyone, any of the places you were at the last 48 hours, and send those people a message, an anonymous message, alert, you were in proximity of somebody who's tested positive for COVID, watch yourself for symptoms, that sort of thing. And then there's the contact tracing, at restaurants and that sort of thing. You don't do that when you go to the grocery store. You don't have to fill anything out. It's pretty much just at restaurants and bars.
When did lockdown begin there? When did people start quarantining?
I think second week of March, first week of March, around the 9th, somewhere between the 9th and 12th, I think, because I was in London the last week of February, and I had work meetings, and I actually went to a convention, a conference at the Docklands.
Oh God, remember conferences?
Yeah, and it was kind of that eerie thing where everyone was a little on edge. Some people were wearing masks. People were already tearing down their booths early, so it was obvious they were getting called back home. And in the meantime, I flew home from Germany at the end of the week, and I was talking to my family in Italy, and they were my cousins that are up in Milan in the north, and they were talking about what was going on there. And it became obvious this wasn't going to be like SARS or N1H1 swine flu. It was going to be a lot more intense. And then I kind of think like it was like semi shut down. And then like 2 days later, it's like everyone stay home. No one's going to the office. The only thing that's open are pharmacies and grocery stores. And, and they had all the new rules with hospitals and all that sort of stuff. So then, yeah, and we were in that mode for about, I think, 2.5, 3 months.
But you're saying restaurants and stuff for outside dining were starting to open in June.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
That's amazing.
Earlier, actually, I think May, maybe even.
You guys must have locked down hard then. I mean, we also, it was the middle of March, but we really just started in New York anyway, just getting a little bit of glimmers of light. You can go out a little bit in like a couple of weeks ago, a month ago, maybe.
We were never really because I was talking to family in the north in Italy, and we weren't really locked down as intense as that, where it's like only one person's allowed out of the household at a time, and you have to have a form filled out with you. You'll be stopped by the police, and they're gonna ask you for ID and where you're going and how long you expect to be out. It was never that intense here. We would. We could go walk the dog. Parks were open. You were allowed to kind of walk through the parks and keep distance. The playgrounds were closed, but it didn't really feel like lockdown. And, grocery stores were open. Obviously, we had the great toilet paper and paper towel shortage, and things like eggs and flour and all that sort of stuff. I'm like, what am I going to do? Make pasta through the whole thing?
Answer yes.
Yes, yeah. Well, if you saw me, you would say yes, you clearly have been doing that. So there were little shortages of things here and there, but it was never like this panic of what are we going to do? This is just an outsider's view, having lived in Germany for 3 years. There's a different sense of personal responsibility here. And that's not a criticism or it's just kind of an observation. People are a little bit more observant of okay, how this is the easy thing for me to do. But if I leave a mess here, or if I don't do this, it's going to cause problems for my neighbor. So they're a little more conscious of that, I think, here. Which probably has to do with having to rebuild their entire country after World War II. So I think there's a little bit of that ingrained still here. So, people wore masks. People weren't, I'm sure there were illegal parties and stuff going on, but there wasn't a lot of that. And I think that helped, and I think they kind of acted swiftly here, and there was a lot more cooperation at the state and local level with the federal level here. And so I think that helped.
I mean, has it been, you're relatively new to Germany,
Yeah.
3 years, and it's not your home country. It's probably home now, maybe,
Yeah,
but
it definitely is now.
is but was it doubly isolating to be sort of locked in a place that's still kind of unfamiliar?
Yeah, that's a good question. It did feel weird a little bit. Like I kind of had like this guilt of like, oh, I'm not there for New York. Um, there was a little bit of that, but it's like my family. I have family here. I had a lot of friends here before we even moved, and we've got a nice support group of friends. So it wasn't as isolating. It was just kind of like, wow, well, what's really going on? I'm seeing what's happening on the news and what we're seeing on the news here and how it's being reported. So it was more like checking in with friends and like, what's it really like? What's going on?
What does America and New York look like from over there?
Um, I mean, it depends on what news source you're reading and kind of, who you're talking to. I mean, I think people are a little bewildered at I think the impression is America's a bit of a shit show as far as how they've handled the crisis. And, it was kind of like, why do they have to have these briefings every day? Like, just do a briefing when there's actual stuff to report, And, there is a little bit of that anti mask thing here, but it's really confined. It's not like I think once I've been in a situation where somebody wasn't wearing a mask in a grocery store and security were like, you have to either leave or put a mask on. We have a mask here for you that's clean, but if you don't want to comply, you're going to leave. And the person was like basically a junkie, like a complete mess. It wasn't like somebody trying to make a political statement. I grew up in Kansas City, so I talked to my family and friends there, and they've all been saying like, we go out and no one's wearing a mask, nobody's practicing social distancing, so there's been a bit of bewilderment, when we see things like that on the news, like, like what are you all thinking? And it's concern too because it's affecting the U.S. economy, which affects everybody. So it's not necessarily so much finger wagging. It's more like, we want you guys to be safe so that we can all get back to business as usual.
Speaking of economies at business as usual, you're a representative of another misunderstood nation, which is event production.
Yeah.
How are you doing in all of this
Well,
now that you can't work really?
yeah, I mean, for me, as you know, it's like there's a double whammy where I live in Germany, but all my work is pretty much US, New York based. So that's been, you're asking about like that's been kind of the isolatory kind of aspect of it where, you know, uh, it's a little frustrating because I'm kind of apart from my clients and my industry physically. Obviously, a lot of events canceled. It was like literally I had projects going on in London, a couple of potential things here in Germany. And I was like, wow, 2020 is going to be my year. This is going to be great. I've got a lot of stuff going on in the US, and the gaps in my calendar are going to be filled with things in London, things here in Germany. And then literally within 3 days, everything disappeared. um, so I'm doing a few digital events where it works for clients. And, that's been kind of interesting because there's a little bit of trepidation. And I mean, I've talked to you about, some of these projects. There's a little bit of trepidation from clients like, well, is this going to work? Or what is the template? What is the format to do a digital event? And it's like, well, we don't know. Like, we can make it up. Like, so there's that part of it has been really interesting and kind of a fun creative process. The not fun part is obviously everyone's budgets are, decimated this year because a lot of people are using their events budgets to keep their staff on payroll.
Sure.
So, that's been tough. I was yesterday, I was watching BBC News, and Andrew Lloyd Webber was on. And there's a whole movement in the UK where they're pressuring the government, like, you have to give us a date that we can start doing events, and you have to tell us exactly what those events need to look like as far as capacity, restrictions, because, it takes us 6 months to get things up and running. And so that's been a bit of the problem. I don't know if you've seen that there, but like in Berlin, for instance, starting I think last week, you can do outdoor events for up to 5,000 people, but with social distancing, with all the restrictions and health precautions that they've listed out. But that date wasn't like a definite. It was like this could change the week before if there's a spike in cases, or if we don't think it's safe. So you can't tell a client, or you can't plan a festival or an event when you're not sure if that's a real reasonable date that you're going to be able to do it on. So I think that's the problem we're facing now, is like nobody knows like when we can actually come out of this and what it's really going to look like. So it's going to take us that much longer to kind of get back up and running.
I mean, what I'm seeing here is just a nightmare in that, my work is much less event dependent than yours is, but still, I have a toe in that world for sure. And the lack of guidance at the national level has just been stunning.
Yeah.
And so everything is kind of state by state, and everything's become this weird political statement, like where there's, here and in California, you cannot have a gathering. It cannot be done.
Yeah.
But then you have the president having, these huge rallies with thousands of people without masks on.
Yeah.
And you'll have this huge motorcycle rally with 250,000 people
I saw
at it.
that. Yeah.
And it's become some kind of weird political statement of whether or not you're willing to attend something like that shows where you are on the political spectrum as much as you're concerned for your own health. And it's just so bizarre. Like I look at the news every day, and I feel like I'm living in some kind of dystopian, bad dystopian David Fincher movie or something that I want to walk out of.
Yeah, no, I know. I mean, the Event Safety Alliance in the US did a really fantastic, like, comprehensive guide that you can download for free off their website. And it's like, this is, they pulled in lawyers, they pulled in events people, they pulled in health professionals, and they looked at kind of all the regulations that are going on, not only in the US, but what other countries are doing, and kind of whittle that into like one, like, this is our recommendation, these are the safety recommendations and that sort of thing. So, there's as far as advocacy to the government, we've got great people speaking up for the events industry, I think, between the Event Safety Alliance, the Live Event Coalition. But even within those, like, more the Live Events Coalition pages on Facebook, it's turning into like people attacking each other. That's a stupid idea. You obviously haven't been in the business very long. Or, this is Trump's fault, this is Cuomo's fault. It's just descended into that, which isn't really helping anybody. So I'm trying to keep out of it and just focus on my little events that I'm doing and start planning ahead for like what could be happening next year.
Well, what do you hear from people? Because event world, there's a very small percentage of people in event world whose work translates to a digital space, right? Like what I do does, you still need to produce a video. People still need coordination and production. But like if you rent stage decks or lighting trusses, or you're
that's kind of what you
lighting
do.
guy or a band, or what are these people doing now?
Well, it's funny. We were like, I was in a lot of brainstorming roundtables when the big shutdown first kind of started. And, I was like, look, you've got all these people out of work who are really qualified problem solvers. Why not like employ them to help with, like, when we go back to school? Like, you've got empty theaters, movie theaters, convention centers, parking lots of stadiums. You've got all this real estate that's not being used. Why don't you turn those into like study centers, so the students can go there and do their e-learning and get out of the house, and you put them in groups of like 10, so they're at least allowed to socialize with like 9 other friends. And then you can employ all these out of work people to kind of be safety monitors and give them PPE and stuff like that. But, then
Set the space up and tear it down at the end of the day. I
yeah,
mean, that's what.
or leave it up, leave it up, make it a multi, purpose kind of thing. But then you get into like, well, if it's a state school and you're using private property and the student gets injured, liability issues, and you have to do background checks on all the people because they're around kids. But it's like let's look at what resources we've got. And I think that's the thing, going back to what I was saying earlier. It's like, if we knew we're coming out of this in 6 months, then it's like, okay, there's no point in doing all that. We can wait it out. But if we know we're going to be in this for another year and a half, 2 years, which is what I think it's going to be, then like, let's take a couple months and like come up with a plan for the next 18 to 20 months, to utilize these things. And then, instead of paying people unemployment, you can pay them to do a job, and they're contributing, and they don't feel like they're not contributing, I don't know. I don't know what, that's kind of a crazy idea, but I kind of think it's time for crazy ideas.
What, I mean, it's an interesting question to say we demand to know when we can do this.
Yeah.
Because nobody knows,
Yeah.
right? Like what is required? A vaccine? Nobody knows how long that's going to take.
Yeah. I mean, it is a little, I think people are just starting to get frustrated because there's not any assistance coming. Like my case, because I'm a US citizen who lives abroad and my work is based in New York, I'm not eligible for any benefits anywhere. So like, I've kind of fallen through the cracks, and I have a lot of expat friends who are like, I can't apply for assistance in the US because, I moved to the UK or Belgium or Sweden with my spouse, and I work remotely for a US based company. I've lost my job, but because I live abroad, they're not giving me benefits. So there's been a lot of people like that kind of falling through the cracks. Yeah, I mean, that's, obviously I pay attention to that because that's kind of my demographic. But yeah, I think it's hard to say like, when are we going to come out of this? But, I think it's like the government's shut us down, and we understand that's for everybody's safety. And that was the prudent thing to do. But then, we were making a joke here. I was making a joke with some colleagues up in Berlin that like prostitution's legal here. So like brothels are allowed to open up, sex dungeons.
That's not socially distant.
And I'm like, okay, so wait a second. Like, prostitutes and dominatrixes are back to work, but we event producers can't get back to work. I'm like, maybe we should turn venues into like brothels or something. Like, I don't know. Like, what are we gonna do? So, I think there's a little bit of frustration there where it's like, well, there's 40 people in the grocery store at one time. Why can't I have 40 people in my little music venue, socially distanced? So there's a little bit of, I think, people are getting a little frustrated at that, understandably.
I mean, I've known you for a long time as someone who's, you're very good at your job. You're very accomplished. You're very proud of your work. I know you like to travel, and you really like what you do. Has it been weird to be sort of a housefrau?
Yeah, totally. It's really funny. The first day my husband worked at home, I have like an office space just off of our bedroom, and that's kind of my home office. But in reality, I'm usually sitting at our dinner table with my laptop because it's nice and bright. Anyway, he was like, well, I'm going to go set up downstairs in the home office. And I got kind of protective and defensive. I'm like, well, I was going to work there today. And then we both just started laughing. I'm like, there's nothing for me to work on. There's no events. The event industry is dead. There is nothing for me to work on. So please go use the home office. I will sit up here and watch, Lion, or what was it, Tiger King. So yeah, it's been weird. And like, we do travel a lot. A musician friend of mine who's like semi-pro, she's American and lives up in Berlin. We check in on each other, and she said, I'm kind of enjoying the peace and quiet and not having to get on a tour bus and not having to promote a gig. because she's always got like 5 or 6 bands going, and she's on the road with this band and this other tour is starting up. And, there's been good benefits for working musicians and artists in Germany. So she's not worried about rent or buying groceries. So it's not that she's taking a vacation, but she's kind of like, I'm taking courses online. I'm doing other stuff that I ordinarily don't get to do. For me, it's been weird. It's like, I'm in New York 5 or 6 times a year for a good 2 or 3 week pop. I'm in London a lot. We travel a lot also for fun. And, I think this is the longest I've been in one place in like 25 years. And I'm sure a lot of people are saying the same thing, if not even longer. It's weird, but we have a comfortable space. Like my personal situation is we're really fortunate. Like we have a comfortable place to live. We're in a nice neighborhood. There's parks. There's a couple parks nearby you can go to. We're walking distance with some of our friends, so we can meet up in a park and, sit at opposite benches and, bring a bottle of wine to the park or something like that. So it hasn't been like we're totally cut off. So that's kind of been the lifesaver for me. But, I don't do the Zoom parties and how the first couple of times, I think the first weeks we were all kind of, in the shutdown mode. That was the thing to do. Like, let's have a drink together. And then it just kind of bummed me out. I was like, actually, I get more depressed if I'm not thinking about missing my friends. And then if I'm watching them on like a video chat kind of thing. So I kind of stopped doing that early on. But yeah, I mean, it hasn't been as bad as I thought it was going to be as far as,
Well, that's
yeah.
That's good. I mean, I worry about people. I worry about you. I worry about,
Yeah.
just like people I know who like to work, who can't. I feel like
Yeah.
that must be a really frustrating thing.
I mean, and that's the frustrating thing is like, none of us are slackers. Like, I've severed a few relationships during this period. Somebody said, well, the vacation's over. You guys need to all get back to work. And I'm like, I can't get back to work, and I'm 51 years old. Like, it's not that I'm not open to applying my skill set to another field, but like there's kind of an unemployment problem going on too right now,
Right.
and like, where am I going to go get new training? Schools are shut down. Like, I'm not going to spend a significant amount of money when I don't have income coming in to go to like a school and so it's just not that easy. And, my comeback was like, if you think that like we're slackers, like look at my client list and look at the work I've done. I didn't get that from like sitting on my ass all day, and that's true for, I think, most of the people. I mean, that's what I love about the events industry is people are hardworking, they're problem solvers. They don't take nicely to we can't do that. It's like, well, what can we do? How can we do that? Like, how else can we achieve this? Like, can we do it this way? So, I think especially for people who are fixers and problem solvers, when it's something that's bigger than you and you can't fix it, it's really frustrating. I know a lot of people have been having a hard time with that.
I mean, what do you think? You said before you think it's going to be a year or 2 years before things are really.
Yeah, I mean, I know that sounds pretty like dismal, but I mean, here's the thing. Like yesterday, I was reading something about a great idea where for Broadway, where it's like you kind of corral a bunch of theaters together, and in order to get into that area, you have to do like maybe they can invent a on the spot COVID test, like a pregnancy test. And if you are negative, it's pretty sure you're going to be negative for about a 24-hour period. Then you can go into the closed off area and go enjoy a performance. And there's still social distance, there's still masks, hand washing, all that. But at least there's that added bit of security there, and you can maybe put more people in. But my thing is like there's people shooting security guards at Walmarts because they got told to wear a mask. How is somebody going to take it when they paid money to go to good money to go see a theatrical performance or concert, and they're told, well, you can't come in because the test is positive. You might be positive for COVID, so we can't let you in. Like, what's that going to look like? And then what happens to the people who are in line in front and behind them and around them? Like, have they been exposed? Like, should we not let them in? So it just turns into like this whole, where it's like I try to be optimistic and look for solutions, but then when you really start looking into implementing it, it's tough.
I mean, frankly, I'm not a scientist or a doctor, but I I speak to scientists and doctors a
Yeah.
lot, and I what I understand of the science is that that kind of instant read test is, I mean, the test that they have now takes a while to process and is not that accurate. I mean, it's
Yeah.
only there's a lot of false positives, there's a lot of false negatives, and if I feel like that kind of instant read test is as big a scientific push as a vaccine would be.
Yeah,
Like that's
exactly.
probably also 2 years away if
Yeah,
somebody were to really.
yeah, exactly. So, that's why I think it's like, look, the so-called Spanish flu or whatever the correct term for it is, that lasted about 2 years, and there was never a vaccine for that. They just got the infection rates so low that it hasn't been a problem, and there's little spikes here and there of it around the world, but they're able to contain it. So I think that's the part that I'm optimistic about. It's like, well, they managed to get the infection rates down, and the virus kind of ran its course, so to speak. So, hopefully that's what happens with this. But, all it takes is, one super spreader event, and, we're back into a big mess again.
I think about that 1918 flu sometimes, and I find a weird glimmer of hope there that, people have all these doom and gloom op-ed pieces and stuff that theater will be dead for 20 years or,
Yeah.
like there's no, and I think about the history of actually what happened right after that flu is people were so hungry for connection and so hungry for
Yeah.
kind of ecstatic release. It was the jazz age. It was the 20s. It was
Yeah.
speakeasies and like this big explosion of music and socialization and, sexual liberation and all this stuff.
Yeah.
And I find some hope in that,
Yeah, I do too. And like for me, it's like there's been a lot of creativity. People have had time on their hands and they're trying to be creative and think of like, okay, how could we do an event, And we saw right away it was like the drive-in events. And then there's been all these other kind of takes. And it's like, let's take some of that creativity back when we're able to do events again and start thinking out of the box, and let's actually be disruptive.
My name is David Hoffman, and this is The Big Shut-In. I produce this show, post-production by Garrett Tiedemann. It's a production of Race Car Radio. If you're enjoying this series, I'll also steer you to our new sister series, COVID University New York. In it, the very talented Shar Adams takes a comprehensive look at life under COVID by using the City University of New York, CUNY, as a microcosm. You can find it at racecarradio.com and wherever you get podcasts. If you have feedback for me or a story that you think might be a good fit for this show, please do reach out at thebigShutin@racecarradio.com.